Roger looked only at his wife. She was pale and drained. Her beautiful eyes conveyed fear and a clear plea. Now only her face, swollen with tears, did not express contempt and hatred for him. The courtroom was silent and anxious as everyone awaited the verdict. The eyes of those present were fixed upon the judge, who was about to pronounce his verdict. There was no one in the courtroom except his Julia, who did not wish the worst for him now. And there was no one in the whole world for Roger except for his beloved wife. Throughout the entire last court session, Roger did not look towards the family of the deceased old man, but he knew he would only see hatred in their eyes. Roger himself would hate someone who killed a member of his family. In the eyes of all present, he was a monster who had killed the old man and fled without even trying to help him. Roger's mother raised him alone. She died before he turned 10 years old, and he grew up in the village with his grandmother, who also passed away 5 years after his mother. How painful it is to see all this hatred in people's eyes, thought Roger, as he sat on the defendant's bench. But it would be 1,000 times harder for me to see my mother and grandmother killed by grief. It's good that they don't see this shame now. 4 years, pronounced the judge as the verdict. The judge's words hit him like a heavy blacksmith's hammer on his head. Julia cried out loud, and the people in the courtroom were dissatisfied. Someone shouted about vigilante justice, and someone demanded a longer sentence. And Roger thought only of the fact that he would not see his baby come into the world, would not meet Julia from the maternity hospital, would not walk with her, the baby, in the public garden, and would not teach the baby to take his first steps. "Julia, everything will be fine. Think about the baby. Don't get nervous," he shouted when she tried to break through to him. On the way out of the hall, he heard her parting words. "Roger, we'll wait for you." He was ready to do anything for Julia, but knew that clearly, and now he accepted the punishment instead of her. She definitely wouldn't have handled it. "And I'm a man, I'm strong, and I'll endure everything I have to endure. I will return, and we will be together again. We will have a baby," as she said. "I will only think about them, my beloved Julia and the baby. Everything else doesn't matter." These thoughts filled his head, not giving him the opportunity to think about his own fate. And his fate at the moment was very unenviable. After receiving 5 years of general regime for hitting a pedestrian, Roger lost everything dear to him. The scariest thing about this situation was that all the people, as it seemed to him now, hated and cursed him. And all his fault was only that he loved and pitied Julia very much. The first night in the prison, where he was brought closer to the evening, passed without any special incidents, although his imagination had already painted him a horrible picture of prison cruelty and lawlessness. To some extent, Roger was lucky. The prisoners with whom he ended up in the same cell were mostly ordinary people who had violated the law out of carelessness or stupidity. Lying in the cell on a hard mattress and staring into the darkness of the night, he replayed everything that had happened to him over the past few months. Roger remembered that terrible night when he was waiting for Julia from a party with her friends and was very worried that she was not answering his calls. He felt like it had just happened yesterday. Roger saw his wife's trembling figure standing on the doorstep that night. She looked crazy and smelled of alcohol. Stammering, she tried to explain something to him. "Roger, it's not my fault. I don't understand how he ended up on the road. Yes, I drank a little at the party, but I didn't want to leave my car there, and he jumped out of the darkness, and I didn't understand where he came from. He remained lying there. I didn't stop. I was scared." Roger couldn't understand what Julia was trying to say to him at the time. It wasn't until later that the meaning of her words finally reached him. Julia had killed a man. This thought didn't allow him to concentrate on anything else. Roger, what will happen to me now?" His wife cried and grabbed his hands. "And if he died, am I a murderer? Oh no!" She looked like a child trying to find protection from someone stronger, an adult. All thoughts in Roger's head were tangled in one huge knot, and he could not understand how to unravel it until Julia said just 2 words. "I'm pregnant. Roger, what will happen to me? I can't go to jail. I just wanted to tell you tonight that I'm pregnant and will have a baby." After hearing this, the knot in Roger's head unravelled by itself, and the solution to the problem became so obvious. "Calm down now. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant before? I wouldn't have let you go to that party. Why did you drink?" Roger hugged his wife. "If they find your car, I'll tell the police that I was driving tonight and I hit a man." Julia didn't try to dissuade him, she just cried. Roger ran to the garage and inspected the car. There were traces of blood, a dent on the hood, and a cracked bumper. In a hurry, without thinking anything, he tried to wipe with a rag all the prints that Julia could have left in the car. He wiped the steering wheel, door handles, and then, fidgeting and nervous, he started grabbing with his hands all the protruding objects in the car, trying to leave as many of his fingerprints as possible. When the police arrived at the doorstep of their house, Roger already had a clearly formulated proof of his guilt. He didn't even intend to deny that it was his car that hit the man to death that night. Julia pretended to be surprised in front of the police, saying that she didn't even suspect what had happened. She threw herself into her husband's arms when he was taken away. "Roger, what have you done? How could you? We're going to have a baby." She reproached her husband so convincingly that Roger himself began to gradually believe that the death of the old man was solely on his conscience. "What? The boy can't sleep." Roger heard an old voice from the pitch-black darkness of the cell. "I couldn't get to sleep at first either. Don't worry, you'll get used to it." It turned out that his night interlocutor was a strong old man named Richard. Roger told Richard what brought him to prison, not hiding his real story. "Yeah, I messed up big time too." Richard wanted to vent to Roger about his soul. "I've been sitting here for 6 months, and for what? And that scumbag I barely touched. It wouldn't really have hurt to knock him out. I worked as a ranger. Some scoundrels started wreaking havoc in my forest. Whether they were poachers or just idiots having fun, I don't know. They shot a moose once, and the fawn was left without a mother. It would have been fine if they just were hunting for food, but they were just causing damage. They shot swans on the lake, burned squirrels for entertainment. So John, my assistant, and I decided to track them down. John was still a greenhorn. He looked very like my late son. I protected him like he was my own, and those wretches fired at him when he chased after them. I couldn't hold back. I fired once, twice. Who knew the pellets would hit one guy in the soft spot? John was more seriously hurt, and those scumbags didn't even flinch. But now I'm the one who got sentenced. That wounded parasite turned out to be the prosecutor's son. They were just having innocent fun with their friends, they say, and I, the villain, wanted to kill them. And here I am. Don't be afraid, Roger. There are people living here too. Somehow we'll get through this and stand by each other through thick and thin. No one will be able to scare us." And so Roger started serving his sentence. He got used to it over time. Julia called him and passed on messages, promising to come visit him. Roger asked her about their child. He was eager to know whether they were having a boy or a girl. He couldn't wait for their meeting, to put his hand on his beloved's belly and feel their baby kicking. He came up with names and eagerly told Richard about the smart son or little princess he and Julia will have. But one day, his wife gave him unpleasant news. "You won't have a son or daughter. I lost the baby a long time ago. I just didn't want to upset you." Julia's cold, almost indifferent voice washed over him like cold water. "Julia, how could you not tell me? When did this happen?" Roger couldn't gather his thoughts when a cruel suspicion suddenly crept into his mind. "Julia, have you ever been pregnant?" "Think what you want if you don't believe me." His wife responded sharply and hung up. Since then, Julia didn't write or call him and wouldn't answer his calls. Roger couldn't find peace, blaming himself for asking his wife such a cruel, heartless question that undoubtedly hurt a woman who had lost her child. So, when Richard was released from prison, Roger asked him to go to his home first thing and find out how his beloved Julia was doing. He wrote her a letter begging for forgiveness for his cruel accusation, expressing his love for her and asking her to at least let him know how she was doing. A couple of days later, Roger heard Richard's voice on the phone. "Listen, son, don't do anything stupid. I don't know how to tell you this, but your wife seems to have left a long time ago. The house is empty. I asked the neighbours. They say they haven't seen her in 2 years. Apparently, she's moved to the capital. That's not the worst part. The most important thing is that she's alive and well. Thank you, Richard. I'll find her myself when I get out. She's really angry with me, it seems." 2 years had passed. Roger stood in front of a boarded-up, abandoned house, shooing away a nosy neighbour with annoyance. "Don't make up stories, ma'am. You're a well-known fantasist." "You see, Roger, she fooled you. Everyone here knows that. As soon as they put you in the jail, she immediately started an affair with some guy from the city. Go to Megan, her friend from the grocery store. She knows exactly what happened." Listening to the slightly frightened Megan, his wife's former classmate, Roger began to realize that all these years he had been a complete fool. "You don't blame her, Roger. You went to jail, and she met a guy from the capital on the internet. He came to see her in his fancy car and proposed to her. Why should she sit here alone in the middle of nowhere?" said Megan. "What a wretch," Roger muttered through his teeth. "You just don't look for Julia. She's got little kids now. Twins were born last year. You won't hurt her, will you?" frightened the chatty friend. "I've had enough of your Julia," muttered Roger, his head spinning, his throat constricted. He spat loudly and left, slamming the door loudly. Days and nights merged into one endless chaos for Roger, who couldn't distinguish between days and weeks in his drunken stupor. He recalled Richard's stories and felt like a wild animal, shot in the flank by poachers and losing all desire to live and fight. The realization that the one he had ruined his life for had betrayed him, cutting all the threads that connected him to this life, left him killing himself with alcohol every day. "Is anyone home?" A high-pitched female voice came from under the window. Roger didn't want to answer. He had nothing left to buy alcohol with today, and he was in a terrible mood. He just lay there staring at the ceiling, hoping that his splitting headache would shut off his consciousness in one moment and he wouldn't think, suffer, or live anymore. "Hey, Roger, are you home?" Someone called persistently under the window. Roger reluctantly pulled himself up to the open window. He looked into the blue eyes of some girl. "What do you want?" he grumbled irritably. "I'm Elaine, your neighbour. I've been wanting to visit you." "You're my neighbour? But you never come to visit me or invite me over." "Elaine? The one who used to beg for apples for my grandma all the time?" Roger tried to remember. "That was a long time ago," Elaine laughed. "You might as well remember the time of the dinosaurs. It's been almost 20 years. "Wow, you've grown up, neighbour. Do you have something to drink by any chance?" Roger decided to take advantage of the girl's friendliness. Elaine became serious and said in a completely different tone, "You've had enough to drink. All the neighbours don't know how to help you. I know you're grieving, but it's no reason to destroy yourself. I'll bring you some hot broth and mint tea. After that, I'll make some herbal tea for you. My grandmother taught me how to help people cope with alcohol addiction. I won't leave you alone. You'll drink some tea now, get some rest, and then we'll go for a walk in the forest. It's so beautiful there. The birds are singing, and you'll forget about your troubles." And so it happened. Elaine took it upon herself to save Roger. She had loved him since childhood, but back then the age difference was too great, and the guy didn't pay any attention to the feisty, funny neighbour girl. But she always remembered him and couldn't watch quietly as he killed himself with alcohol. Every visit from Elaine was like a ray of light in Roger's dark and stuffy life. She brought joy and light into his home, dispelling all the gloomy thoughts with her laughter. Roger changed that day. He quit drinking, got a job, and seriously thought about proposing to Elaine. Only one thing stopped his thoughts of marrying her. Elaine's parents, and even the girl herself, wouldn't want to tie their fate to a former prisoner. "But why do you need me, Elaine? I was in prison." He tried to talk to the girl. "I'm not stupid or blind. Everyone in the village knows who your wife was. And from the first day, everyone only discussed how you covered for her and went to jail instead. You're a very good person, and I love you." Elaine's words stirred up such a storm of feelings in Roger's soul that he grabbed the girl in his arms and started spinning her around the room. "How I love you, Elaine!" Roger stopped, put the girl down on the floor, and looking into her eyes said, "Will you marry me? I've been waiting for this for more than 10 years. She laughed happily. "Of course I will be your wife." Roger was finally happy again. They were preparing for the wedding. He decided to find Richard and invite him to be the godfather at the wedding. But Richard's phone didn't answer. Roger remembered the name of the village where his prison friend was from, and on the first day off, he went with his bride to search for the old gamekeeper. In the village they arrived at, everyone knew Richard, and Roger easily found his dilapidated house on the edge of the forest. When they entered his house, Roger immediately realized that something was wrong with him. The old man lay in bed and didn't even turn his head at their greeting. Richard had a high fever, and he was breathing heavily. At first glance, it was clear that the elderly man needed urgent medical attention. The couple took him to the district hospital, and while the doctors cured his advanced pneumonia, Roger didn't leave the elderly man alone and sat by his bed for days. They decided with Elaine that they would take Richard with them, and when his life was already out of danger, They took him to their village. Immediately after the wedding, Roger began building a big house next to the one he had lived in with his grandmother as a boy. Elaine was expecting their first child, and Roger was overjoyed about this. Richard had completely recovered and now tried to help them in everything. One day, Megan, the classmate and friend of Julia, came to Roger when he was at work. "Roger, I didn't dare come to your house, but we need to talk. Oh, how we need to." What Megan told him left Roger completely confused. It turned out that his ex-wife wanted to come back to him and asked Megan to probe the ground regarding getting rid of Elaine from her path. "What nonsense, Megan! Did you tell her that I was married?" "Yes, I told her everything, but Julia is sure that you still love her, that Elaine is no rival for her, and that you will forgive and take her back." I can't believe my ears. You told me that she has a beautiful, wealthy husband and children. Why does she need me? Well, Roger, let me tell you a secret. Julia's husband caught her with their driver, like in a bad joke. He returned from a business trip at the wrong time, probably on purpose. He had long suspected Julia of having affairs on the side. Well, you understand, children in daycare, husband at work, she got bored. In general, her husband caught them red-handed in their bedroom and threw her out of the house, literally. She's at some friends now. Her husband hired lawyers and wants to get custody of the children. She doesn't seem to object. Am I her backup plan or something? Roger, my business is only to warn you. Your Elaine is as simple as a calf compared to Julia, and she's a beauty. She always has been, and now she's a real socialite from the capital. Well, let her stay there in the capital. Did her driver leave her too? He disowned her too, lost his job and ran off somewhere. In any case, I have passed on the news to you, so wait for her to visit. Let her not even think about it. I won't accept her, so just tell her. I'll tell her, but you know her. She makes her own decisions. 3 weeks had passed. The small but friendly family had developed a habit of drinking tea. During one of these tea parties, they heard the gate creaking. Julia was standing on the path leading to the garden with suitcases in her hands. "Roger, I'm back," she pretended to cheerfully shout at Roger. Richard was the first to stand up from the table, while Roger and Elaine, shocked, were trying to figure out what to say and do. "Sweetheart, let's go. I'll accompany you to the gate. Go in peace and don't bother good people," said Richard firmly but politely to the uninvited guest. "You don't understand. This is my home. I used to live here. I have nowhere else to go now. My husband kicked me out. He took away my children and threw me out onto the street. Do you understand? He just got jealous of me out of nowhere and accused me of cheating on him. But Roger, I just made a mistake," Julia replied. "You made a very serious mistake, mate. If you thought you could just appear in Roger's life like this, we won't let you manipulate him again. Leave. This is the last time I'm telling you, and I'm not joking. I already went to jail for shooting one scumbag, and I won't hesitate to do it again for you. I'm itching to beat you up. I'm not afraid of it anymore," Richard warned. Frightened, Julia picked up her suitcases and rushed to the exit. Roger and Elaine looked at the old man with amazement, and he shrugged, smiled, and asked, "What's wrong? Am I wrong? Let's have some tea, or it'll get completely cold." And they all laughed together.